I've been a trucker for over 15 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the interstate at night is no place for the faint of heart. You think the scariest thing you'll deal with is a drunk driver or maybe a close call with a deer, but there's stuff out there that defies reason, and I'm not talking about bad weather or exhaustion. This happened to me last summer. I was hauling a load of industrial machinery from Chicago to Salt Lake City. The company gave me a tight deadline, so I decided to push through the night. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was somewhere in Nebraska, cruising down a stretch of I-80. The road was dead, just my rig, a couple of dim headlights in the distance, and a heavy blackness that swallowed the horizon. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker. Up ahead, near the shoulder of the road, a figure loomed in the edge of my high beams. They stood perfectly still, facing the guardrail, their back to the road. I figured they were lost, or maybe just another unlucky soul whose car had broken down. But as my truck got closer, something didn't sit right. Their posture was wrong, too stiff, like a mannequin left out in a storm. I slowed down, just enough to get a better look as I passed. Big mistake. The figure turned. Their face was the first thing that hit me. A pale, featureless void. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, expressionless mask of skin. The thing moved suddenly, jerking its head toward my truck with an unnatural, twitchy motion. My gut reaction was to punch the gas. I tore past it, heart hammering like a drum. But the thing didn't stay on the side of the road. It moved, fast. In my side mirror, I saw it sprinting after me, its long limbs flailing in eerie, broken angles. It wasn't human, not even close. Its speed was impossible, closing the distance between us in seconds. And then it disappeared. I barely had time to process what I'd seen, or what I hadn't. My eyes darted between the mirrors and the road ahead, my hands gripping the wheel so tight I could feel the veins popping in my arms. The thing was gone, completely vanished. For a moment, I thought maybe it was my imagination. You spend enough hours on the road, sleep-deprived, hyped up on caffeine and truck stop burritos, and your brain starts playing tricks on you. But then I heard it. A thud. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to shake the cab, like something heavy had landed on my trailer. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the outline of the cargo under the tarps. My mind raced. A stray animal? Something falling off a bridge? No, it didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. I had two options: keep driving or pull over to check. Every fiber of my being screamed to keep going, but the thought of something tearing up my load, or worse, climbing inside, forced my hand. I slowed down, easing my rig onto the shoulder. The highway was still dead quiet, save for the low rumble of my engine and the faint whistle of the wind across the plains. I grabbed my flashlight and crowbar from the cab, stepping out into the cool night air. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness as I made my way toward the back of the trailer. My boots crunched on the gravel shoulder, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. Every step felt like a march into something I wasn't prepared for. When I reached the trailer, I paused, shining the light over the tarp. Nothing. No tears. No scratches. Just the tightly secured load, undisturbed. My chest loosened slightly. Maybe I was losing it after all. I exhaled, muttering to myself about needing more sleep, when I heard it again. Thud. But this time it wasn't on the trailer. It was on the roof of my cab. My heart froze. Slowly, I turned the flashlight upward, the beam trembling in my hand. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the smooth curve of the cab's roof, the glint of metal under the moonlight. But as I took a step back, the light caught movement. A long, spindly limb sliding over the edge of the roof, almost insect-like. And then it dropped down. The thing hit the ground in front of me with a wet, sickening sound, like meat slapping concrete. It unfolded itself, rising to its full height, taller than any man, its limbs impossibly thin and jointed in too many places. Its face, or what should have been a face, turned toward me. The pale void stared back, and this close, I could see faint impressions where eyes and a mouth might have been, as if they'd been erased. It didn't lunge. It didn't growl. It just stood there, twitching slightly, like it was studying me. The crowbar felt laughably small in my hand. My legs screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. And then, without a sound, it cocked its head and pointed. Not at me, but at the trailer. My chest felt like it was caving in. The thing's finger, or whatever that elongated, bony appendage was, stayed fixed on the trailer. It was almost as if it expected me to do something. But what? My mind raced, frantically trying to process what was happening. I wasn't about to let this thing back me into a corner. Clenching the crowbar tighter, I stepped back, slowly inching toward the driver's side door. If I could just make it to the cab, lock the doors, and gun it, maybe I could put enough distance between me and it to call for help. But as I moved, so did it. One step forward for every step I took back. Its limbs moved unnaturally, like it was fighting to figure out how a body was supposed to work. The jerky, staccato movements made my skin crawl. My flashlight beam caught the faint shimmer of something on its skin, wetness, or maybe some kind of oil, glistening under the moonlight. Then it stopped. Its head tilted again, this time sharply to one side, as if it were listening to something I couldn't hear. Without warning, it turned and skittered toward the trailer on all fours, faster than I could process. It clambered up the side of the rig in seconds, its limbs hooking into crevices where there shouldn't have been grip. In a blink, it vanished over the top, leaving me standing alone in the dim halo of my flashlight. I should have bolted then and there. My truck was still running. The smart thing to do would have been to floor it, leaving whatever the hell that thing was behind me. But the problem was, it wasn't behind me anymore. It was on the trailer, and the way it had been pointing earlier made my stomach churn. It wanted something in my load. I couldn't just drive away, not knowing what it might do to the cargo. Industrial machinery wasn't the kind of thing you could just write off without consequences. The company would have my head, and besides, some part of me was desperate to understand. Curiosity, or maybe just plain stupidity, rooted me in place. "All right," I muttered to myself, gripping the crowbar like it could actually protect me. "Let's see what you want." I climbed up onto the trailer, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness as I scanned the load. The tarp rippled in the faint breeze, casting eerie shadows over the machinery beneath it. Everything seemed intact. No signs of damage, no sign of the creature. Then I heard it. A faint clicking sound, like claws tapping against metal. It was coming from the far end of the trailer. Swallowing hard, I made my way toward the noise, stepping carefully over the cables and straps that secured the load. My boots felt heavier with each step, my breath loud in the oppressive silence. When I reached the edge of the trailer, I crouched, shining my flashlight down the backside. And there it was. The thing crouched low, one of its gangly arms reaching into the narrow gap between two crates. It was rummaging, its movements precise and deliberate. Whatever it was looking for, it found it. Slowly, it withdrew its hand, clutching something small and metallic. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but when the flashlight caught it, I felt a cold wave of nausea roll over me. It was a sphere, about the size of a grapefruit, covered in strange, glowing symbols. They pulsed faintly, casting a soft, otherworldly light over the creature's skeletal fingers. I didn't know what the object was, but I knew one thing for sure. It didn't belong to me, and it damn sure didn't belong to the company. The thing lifted its featureless face toward me, as if gauging my reaction. Then, without a sound, it leapt off the trailer, landing in the grass below with a sickening crunch. I scrambled to the edge, flashlight in hand, just in time to see it dart into the fields beyond the road, disappearing into the sea of swaying stalks. The glowing sphere was still clutched tightly in its grasp, the light fading as it vanished into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it came back. I climbed down from the trailer, jumped into my cab, and drove, fast. I didn't stop until the sun came up, the pale light of dawn washing away the shadows and terror of the night. By the time I rolled into a truck stop just outside Cheyenne, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me shaking and exhausted. My hands felt numb from gripping the wheel, and my throat was raw from muttering prayers and curses to no one in particular. I pulled into a far corner of the lot, away from the other rigs, and killed the engine. Sitting there in the quiet stillness of dawn, I tried to make sense of what had happened. What the hell was that thing? And what was that sphere it took? The thought of it gnawed at me, but I knew there was no easy answer waiting for me at the bottom of this rabbit hole. I climbed out of the cab, my legs stiff and my nerves raw, and inspected the trailer. Nothing seemed out of place, no damage, no signs of a struggle. If I told anyone what happened, they'd think I'd lost it. Hell, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. But I knew what I'd seen. Something real, something alive, and something dangerous. Inside the truck stop diner, the smell of coffee and bacon was almost enough to settle my nerves. Almost. I slid into a booth near the window, where I could keep an eye on my rig, and ordered breakfast. The waitress, a friendly middle-aged woman named Carol, noticed the state I was in. "Rough night?" she asked, setting a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. "You could say that," I replied, my voice rough. "Long haul?" she asked, nodding toward my rig parked outside. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep the conversation casual. "Just strange things out there on the road, you know?" Carol smiled knowingly. "You're not the first trucker to say that. This stretch of highways got its share of stories. People see things, hear things." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of stories?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Depends on who you ask. Some folks talk about shadow figures hitching rides. Others swear they've seen lights out in the fields like UFOs or something. And then there's the disappearances." "Disappearances?" My heart thudded in my chest. She nodded. "Every now and then, a driver goes missing. Rig left on the side of the road. No sign of the driver. People say it's exhaustion, or they just walked off to start a new life. But," she trailed off, her expression darkening, "not everyone's convinced." I tried to mask the unease spreading through me. "You believe any of that?" Carol shrugged. "I've lived out here long enough to know there's more to the world than what we can explain. If I were you, I'd keep my eyes open. You never know what's lurking out there." Her words stayed with me long after I finished my meal and hit the road again. As the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done with whatever had happened that night. That sphere, it wasn't just some random piece of cargo. Felt significant, like it wasn't meant to be here. And the creature, whatever it was, it knew that. The rest of the drive to Salt Lake City was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. I kept checking my mirrors, scanning the horizon, half expecting to see that thing chasing me down again. But the only thing behind me was endless asphalt. By the time I reached the delivery yard, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The foreman, a burly guy named Frank, waved me over as I parked and jumped down from the cab. "Cutting it close," he said, checking his clipboard. "You're good to unload at Bay 3. I nodded, keeping my answers short. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the night over and over. As I unstrapped the tarp and prepped the load for the forklift, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. When the cargo was finally unloaded, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The glowing sphere was gone, taken by that creature, but the rest of the shipment was intact. As far as Frank and his crew were concerned, the job was done. But for me, it didn't feel over. I was about to climb back into my truck when I saw him. A man in a dark suit stood near the entrance to the yard, watching me. He wasn't part of the delivery crew, that much was obvious. He looked out of place, like he'd stepped out of a boardroom and into the middle of a truck yard. His gaze was sharp, piercing, like he knew everything about me without having to ask. Before I could react, he started walking toward me. Instinctively, I stepped back, my pulse quickening. "You handled a shipment out of Chicago last night, correct?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. I didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I represent interested parties. Look, if there's an issue with the delivery, you can take it up with dispatch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just the driver." The man's expression didn't change. We're not interested in the machinery. We're interested in the anomaly. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. He knew. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, turning toward my cab. And I don't have time for this. Mr. Tanner, he said, stopping me in my tracks. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hearing my name from his lips sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I turned back, meeting his gaze. Who are you? Think of me as a problem solver, he said. And right now, the problem is that something unusual was removed from the shipment. Something that shouldn't exist in this world. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. And what's that got to do with me? You were the last person to see it, he said. The entity, the sphere. You've been marked, Mr. Tanner. Marked? I laughed nervously, though there was no humor in it. What the hell does that mean? He stepped closer, his face suddenly grave. It means it will come back for you. The entity doesn't just take. It leaves a trace, a connection. And when it's ready, it will find you. I stared at him, my heart pounding. You're saying this thing is still out there? He nodded. And it's not done with you. Before I could respond, the man handed me a business card. It was blank except for a single phone number, printed in bold black text. When it comes, he said, you'll know. And when you're ready to talk, call that number. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing shadows of the yard. I stood there, clutching the card, my mind racing. I didn't call the number. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think some faceless nightmare wants me dead? It sounded insane even in my own head. I crumpled the card and shoved it into the glove box, slamming it shut like I could trap the madness inside. But deep down, I knew that thing wasn't done with me. The drive back east felt like a countdown I couldn't stop. Every mile brought me closer to something I couldn't explain, let alone fight. By the time I crossed back into Nebraska, my nerves were shot. I barely slept at the truck stops, and even when I managed a few hours, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, haunted by dreams of that thing crawling on my trailer, its featureless face staring through my windshield. On the second night, somewhere near Kearney, it happened. The radio cut out first. Static replaced the low hum of country music, crackling like a storm on the edge of a signal. I fiddled with the dial, but every station was the same, just static. Then the headlights flickered. Once, twice, and then held steady but dimmer than before. My grip on the wheel tightened. This was it. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I just knew. The temperature in the cab dropped, the warm summer air replaced by a bone-deep chill. I glanced at the mirrors, scanning for movement, but the highway was empty. Just me and the endless stretch of road. And then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, a shadow moved across the trailer. At first, it was faint, like a trick of the light, but as I stared, it grew clearer. It was there, on the roof of the trailer, crawling, its limbs twisting in impossible directions. My blood turned to ice. I floored it, the engine roaring as the truck surged forward. The shadow clung to the roof, unmoving despite the wind and speed. My mind raced. What did it want? Why now? Then the banging started. A heavy, rhythmic pounding from the roof of the cab, so loud it drowned out the engine. It felt like the whole truck was shaking, like the thing was trying to tear its way inside. My pulse pounded in my ears, and for a split second, I thought about calling the number. But even if I could find the damn card, there wouldn't be time. The windshield cracked. A single line, jagged and sharp, spread across the glass like a spiderweb. Then another, and another. The pounding grew louder, the cracks deeper. I swerved, barely keeping the truck on the road. "Leave me alone," I shouted, not knowing if it could even hear me. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was deafening. The windshield was intact, the radio still hissing static, but there was no more pounding, no movement in the mirrors. I slowed down, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. I had to pull over. I couldn't keep driving, not like this. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, throwing it into park. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed the flashlight from the seat and climbed out. The night air was cold, unnaturally so. My boots crunched on the gravel as I circled the truck, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing looked out of place, no damage to the trailer, no sign of the creature. But I knew better. When I reached the back of the trailer, I froze. There, in the dust caked on the metal, was a single handprint. Long, thin fingers, too many joints, pressed deep into the grime. I backed away, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just stalking me. It was playing with me, testing me, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. I stood there, staring at that handprint, my mind spiraling into a vortex of fear and helplessness. This thing wasn't just haunting me. It was closing in. It had been since that night on the Nebraska highway. And now it wanted something I didn't understand and couldn't escape. But if it thought I was just going to roll over and let it win, it had another thing coming. I climbed back into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. My knuckles turned white on the wheel as I forced myself to think. I needed answers. That man in the suit, the one who'd handed me the card, he knew more than he let on. He'd said it would come back for me, and now it had. Digging into the glove box, I found the crumpled card. My hands trembled as I smoothed it out, the single number printed in bold black. I hesitated for a moment, dread pooling in my gut, then dialed it. The line clicked after one ring. No greeting, just silence waiting for me to speak. "It's back," I said, my voice shaking. "What the hell does it want?" A long pause, then the man's calm, steady voice. "Where are you?" "Eastbound on I-80, near North Platte. Pull off the road. There's a rest area 5 miles ahead. Park there and wait." "Wait for what?" I snapped. "This thing is toying with me. It's on my truck. What am I waiting for?" "For us to contain it," he said simply, and the line went dead. Contain it? What did that even mean? I shoved the phone down and gritted my teeth, the wheels of my rig roaring as I pushed forward toward the rest stop. When I arrived, the place was deserted. The lot was lit by a few flickering streetlights, their orange glow casting long, eerie shadows. I parked near the edge, far from the building, and turned off the engine. The silence was suffocating, the stillness too perfect. And then the lights went out. All at once, the lot plunged into darkness. My pulse spiked, and I fumbled for the flashlight, my shaking fingers barely gripping it. Before I could turn it on, a low hum filled the air, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through my chest. It wasn't coming from my truck. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was everywhere. In the dim glow of the moonlight, I saw it. The creature was perched on the edge of my trailer, its spindly limbs silhouetted against the night sky. It held the same unnerving stillness as before, but this time, there was something different, something almost predatory. And then the hum grew louder. Suddenly, beams of light sliced through the darkness. Black SUVs swarmed the rest area, their headlights blinding. Men in tactical gear poured out, their movements precise and deliberate. They carried strange equipment, devices that buzzed and pulsed with energy. The hum seemed to resonate with their machines, growing in intensity as they formed a perimeter around the creature. "Stay in the truck," one of them shouted at me, his voice muffled through his helmet. I didn't need to be told twice. The men moved in unison, their devices emitting bursts of light that seemed to pin the creature in place. It writhed, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if the light itself was burning it. The symbols on its featureless face began to glow faintly, the same eerie patterns I'd seen on the sphere it had taken. The hum reached a deafening pitch. The creature let out a sound. Not a scream, but a high-pitched, distorted wail that seemed to vibrate through my skull. It twisted violently, its limbs flailing as the men closed in. Then, with a final burst of light, it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. The men lowered their equipment, the hum fading into nothing. One of them approached my truck, pulling off his helmet to reveal the man from before, the one who had given me the card. "It's contained," he said, his tone as calm as ever. "You won't see it again." I opened my mouth to ask 1,000 questions, but he cut me off. You don't need to know what it was or why it targeted you. Just know that it's over. Go home. Forget this ever happened. Forget. I snapped. That thing almost killed me. And you want me to just move on? He leaned in closer, his eyes cold and unyielding. If you value your life, you'll let it go. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the cab of my truck. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. Forgetting wasn't an option. I'd seen too much, felt too much. But one thing was clear. I was alive, and whatever that thing had wanted, it hadn't gotten it. For now, that was enough.